beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. In this guide I will be taking you through all steps required to understand and brew my very tried and tested recipe for an old school West Coast American IPA that I have evolved through some modernising methods. I will take you through all of the steps as well as explaining my recipe. I will then finish up by showing you the end beer and giving my tasting notes. So let's get started. Here is a sneak preview of this beer's vital statistics, which I will fully explain later. This recipe, like all of my shared recipes, is written by me and can be found in full within the video's description, which is underneath the video window when viewed on a desktop computer. You will also find a link within the video's description to the full recipe on Brewhouse, which can be used free of charge with some restrictions. Your first steps before brewing this recipe will be to convert it before ordering in your ingredients. I have an easy guide to doing this on Brewhouse on my channel as shown on screen now. Within this video, this recipe is being brewed using a Brewzilla 3.11 to the volume of 25 litres, or approximately 6.6 US gallons, but as part of the conversion process this can be scaled and shaped to suit your brewing system and volume requirements. Recipe conversion is an essential part of the process for the intended results and applies to all recipes you obtain from others, not just mine. You should also plan your water profile ahead. Water profiles for hoppy beers like this one can certainly make a nice difference, as they will accentuate the hops, which in a beer like this one are designed to shine. The water profile shown on screen is directly from Brewhouse and works very well for my recipe. That is not to say that this is the only way to go, of course, so if you already have a water profile that you particularly enjoy for hoppy beer styles, then certainly you should use it for the best results for your own taste. Let's get brewing, and here I am finalising the mash. This finalisation is made up of chopping movements to break up the grain and stirring. Spending the extra time of gradually adding in your grain a kilo or so at a time, and then finalising in a way that you can see here, is simply the most reliable way to approach any brew. Sure, this may take some extra minutes, but it will ensure that your brewing results are consistent, which is one of the keys to successful brewing, as well as ensuring that you are receiving full conversion results from your grain. Once this mashing in process was complete, I then started the mash. This was done without the top plate on this occasion, as I have been testing the Brewzilla without one in recent times, and have been letting the overflow pipe submerge in the wort close to the top to manage overflow. I found that if I give the grain a 1 minute stir and break it up halfway through the mash, then this keeps efficiency on point and there are no overflow issues. For this brew I used a very standard 65 to 75 degrees Celsius mash profile, which is a 149 to 167 in Fahrenheit. This creates a very standard balance between fermentable sugars and body in your end beer. When it comes to IPA styles, this is a commonly used profile, but some do prefer a slightly higher mash temperature of 67 degrees Celsius or 153 degrees Fahrenheit, and it is certainly worth experimenting with for your own taste. This will produce a slightly less dry end result, but naturally your yeast attenuation rate is also going to be a contributory factor in this regard too. Let's now start looking at this recipe so we can understand it. We have an estimated ABV of 6.6% alongside an IBU of 55, which equates to a BU-GU ratio of 0.89, meaning that this beer is going to have some classic IPA bitterness bite, but without being quite as high as some that can have a ratio of 1 or beyond. Part of the evolution of this recipe is having more grain selection and contribution compared to the very old school 95% Pale Ale and 5% Carahell's grain bill. This recipe uses 90% Pale Ale malt, which provides the vast majority of the fermentables. Within a hop-forward recipe like this one, no taste contribution will be noticed by using this grain, and this is great because it allows the hoppy flavours to shine. We also have Carahell at 5%, which is made by Weyermann. This is a quality drum-roasted caramel malt, which in this recipe assists with body and head formation, but also adds a nice aroma in too. If you cannot obtain this malt from your supplier, then I'm sure they'll be able to offer you an alternative. At 3% we have Cara Munich 1, another drum-roasted caramel malt that is Munich-based this time, which will impart a richer malt contribution along with a richer caramel aroma. When combined with the Carahell, this also assists with obtaining the desired colour for this beer. Then finally at 2% we have a little bit of wheat malt, which is used in this recipe for texture and head retention. So you will note that this grain bill is certainly more technical than a classic IPA, but it certainly evolves the style. After the mash came the sparge. I do this manually by hand always and ensure that the water level does not go very high and is even across the entire grain bed for the best results. Some believe that skipping the sparge gives them just as good results, but your efficiency level will certainly suffer, and for some, myself included, the end beer will be missing a certain something in the flavour department. All you can do is test this for yourself and see what you think. Next up is the boil, and with this one I was welcomed by a sizable amount of hop break, which is the foam found on top. This is simply protein, and this will continue to amass until either the protein clumps together and drops, or you as a brewer do something. If you simply leave this, then you are risking a boil over. Most brewers do as I am doing here and stir this in until it drops, but some will remove it. Removing this protein will improve clarity, but it will also impact flavour. For this reason I choose to stir it in and handle clarity in other ways that are just as effective. As with everything in brewing, I suggest that you try the different ways and formulate your own opinion based on your own experiences rather than those of others. After all, this is all taste based and our individual taste buds vary. This recipe also benefits from the use of a 30-minute boil in keeping with the modern way, and like a modern IPA there are no bittering hops as such, just higher amounts of later additions that keep bitterness in check, but with great old school hops. Let's look at these hops more closely now. Chinook hops are nice and piney with robust flavours of grapefruit along with varied tropical and stone fruit. Whereas Centennial, essentially a stronger version of Cascade, often referred to as Super Cascade with a strong citrus and lemon character along with tropical fruit. Citra is known for its strong citrus flavour as well as offering multiple fruit flavours that include grapefruit, peach, melon and lime. When you put these three hops together, you have yourself a piney tropical fruit bomb classic. If you have never tried this hop pairing before, then you are in for a classic old school hop treat. The 0-minute hop stand for this recipe is performed at 80 degrees Celsius or 176 degrees Fahrenheit, so the use of an immersion chiller is highly recommended. Here I am using the JD Brewing Cellar Chiller, which brought this wort down from boiling to 80 in next to no time. I then removed the chiller and added the hops and gave them a good stir in and left them for 15 minutes. After the hop stand I cooled the wort down to yeast pitching temperature and started transferring to my fermenter, which in this case is the Kegland Bucket Buddy. Once I had some litres of wort transferred, I then pitched my yeast. For this particular brew I used Fermentis US05, which is a classic American neutral yeast with a high attenuation rate. Similar American yeast types will also work with this recipe, as will British yeast if you are looking for a less dry result. As you will note, this yeast was pitched directly into the wort, and I then aimed my wort flow directly at the yeast to rehydrate it. This has been found scientifically to be far better for your yeast than rehydrating in plain water. I started this fermentation at 18 degrees Celsius, and after I saw half attenuation I ramped up to the temperature to 21 degrees Celsius at 1 degree Celsius per day. Approximate equivalents are shown on screen for imperial users. Once the gravity was between 5 to 10 points away from the predicted FG, I added the dry hops. Let's now go through this process. In this example I'm going to use a hop sock, but the procedure is similar with other container types. This starts with boiling the bag. I strongly recommend doing this no matter if the bag has been previously used and cleaned or if it's a brand new one straight out of the packaging. I then add this bag into a clean container and add sanitizer as a further safeguard. This will be the same container that I used to load the hops into. Once the sanitizer has had at least 3 minutes contact time, then this is then removed. After this point I then wash and sanitize my hands, and this is repeated if I need to touch the bag after touching anything that is not clean and sanitary. These are very important steps to avoid contamination, which is all too common when it comes to homebrewers making IPAs because of this step. I then carefully add the dry hops with the bag lining the container, being sure that nothing touches the bag except for the hops. Once you have loaded all of your hops into the bag, then be sure to tie a nice strong knot to keep all of the hops contained. Then, with a clean and sanitary hand, the dry hop bag is then added into the fermenter. I do this when the final gravity is 5 to 10 points away, but some prefer the result by adding sooner. As always, testing for your own taste is the way to go here. Contact time needed is just 3 days, but you can stretch this out to 5 days and still be on the safe side. Let's now take a look and talk tasting notes for this finished beer, starting with this close-up of the actual pour, which looks rather golden. Like with all beers, once in the glass the beer takes on a darker colour. This beer has been in the keg for 3 weeks at the point that you see it now at an average temperature of 5 degrees Celsius, which is the equivalent of 41 degrees Fahrenheit. The beer has been under 12 psi of pressure, which is the equivalent of 0.83 bar for this time, and I'm using this pressure for serving too. No attempts have been made to clear this beer, so what you see is the natural result. This is a beer that I believe tastes best fresh after the second week, but naturally taste buds do vary. Here are my tasting notes for this one. The aroma here is very citrus and piney with plenty of grapefruit along with some other tropical fruit that seems to vary each time you take a sniff. In terms of flavour, this is very fruity citrus with that real classic tropical fruit old school IPA signature that also includes that old school bitterness bite that had been so popular for so many years. Personally, I love it all and want it all, hence why from time to time I need to go back to the classics like this one. This IPA certainly is very refreshing and flavourful. As this beer's name suggests, there are some differences here that take this beer into more than just the old school direction. There is more complexity and flavour offered due to the shorter boil and more complex grain bill. My final impression is that this is an easy drinking classic old school IPA crowd pleaser with enough extra oomph to please the IPA drinker that wants that little bit more. I would be very grateful and interested in hearing from anyone that brews this as to what their impression is. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!